Charles Mitchell. Probably someone you've never heard of, at least not this particular Charles Mitchell. But I want to introduce him to you. I want to share his story because his story is our story. The impact of slavery is still with us today. Charles Mitchell's story began in 1847 during slavery. Now, I know you've heard about slavery, and some people say, why don't you just forget about it and move on? Moving forward is one thing, but forgetting is something you know we should never do. Because that impact is with us today and it will be with us forever. It is a part of us, it is in us, it shapes us. Now, Charles Mitchell was born into slavery in Maryland, but he continued in bondage right here in Washington State. Yes. A slave walked the streets of Olympia, Washington. Now, by 1860, slavery had been a part of America for over 200 years. And some people, were beginning to rethink that. Should we be enslaving people? Is it the proper and Christian thing to do? Well, some said, well, I think we should abolish slavery altogether. Others said, oh, wait now, that's going a bit too far. Why don't we just stop it from spreading? When slavery did spread to Washington, there was no big outcry against it. And I wondered about the slaves who came here. I wondered about Charles Mitchell. If there were slaves, why didn't I hear about any Western Underground Railroad stories? Surely, wherever there are slaves, there are attempts to escape. But I didn't hear about any stories. And I thought, well, maybe it was because of the rugged territory and the native inhabitants might have prevented escape. Or there wasn't enough time to develop as elaborate a system of escape as the Underground Railroad in the East. Or perhaps maybe there just weren't any stories. But then I came across Charles Mitchell. His story convinces me that some sort of Western Underground Railroad did exist. When Charles was about 7 years old, he was brought to Olympia by James Tilton, a well-educated man from a well-to-do family with presidential connections. James Tilton was appointed Washington Territory's first Surveyor General. And when he moved his family out to set up home in Olympia, he brought his property. Now, for Charles, being a slave in the West wasn't that much different from being a slave in the East. There weren't any plantations, but being a slave, being told what to do, when to do it, being told that you're ugly, you're ignorant, you're inferior, and you always will be. These are the things that we were told for generation after generation. It was drilled into us. So I thought about Charles. I wondered if someone who was brought up with those thoughts could even form the idea of freedom and self-reliance. Could Charlie think beyond those invisible chains? Now, by 1860, he had been living in Olympia for about 7 years. And then one day, a certain ship came in. A free black man got off that ship, and he was dressed to kill. He had a sharp suit, nice hat, shiny shoes. Oh yes. Even back then, we liked to look good. Now, this man saw Charlie and said, "Hey, son, I've been watching you." See, something about Charles told the man that Charlie was not free. And so they struck up a conversation. I imagine they got to know each other bit by bit. And then that dapper man started to talk to Charlie about freedom. He said, I know a place where there are a lot of free black folk, not 5, not 10, not 100, but 800 of us moved to Victoria, BC. You don't believe me? It's true. Not only that, our Governor Douglas, he promotes good relations between the races. Word is that he has some dark skin in his family. Well, the free man told Charlie, if you come with me, you could be as free as a bird. Man, you could work for yourself, have your own money. Now, this is an idea most slaves could only dream about. And that's what Charlie started doing. He started daydreaming. The man said, Charlie, look, this is for real. You see that ship right there? The Eliza Anderson? If you get on it, you can get off into freedom. Before Charlie could reach for that freedom the man talked about, several events would have to occur in his life, leading him to his destiny. It began when he was just a child. When Charlie was 2 years old, his mother lay on her deathbed, pleading with her owner, take care of Charlie. That's what you would want, to know that your child would be taken care of. The owner promised she would. And so Charlie's mother, on that promise, died in peace. Charles came into the hands of James Tilton. And when Charlie was 3, a Maryland slave challenged the system. She escaped, and she dared to return to help others escape. She is Harriet Tubman, the one we call Moses. Now, whether Charles ever heard tell of this woman, we'll never know. But if he gets on that ship, he will be challenging the system in his own way. Now, in the beginning of American slavery, ships brought millions of us into slavery. I think it would be only right, poetic even, if a ship took at least one to freedom. Would Charlie be that one? Well, I don't know how long he took to consider the man's proposal, but on September 24th, 1860, Charlie snuck aboard that ship. I imagine the 3 black shipmen were watching out to make sure he wasn't discovered. Charles Mitchell, bound for freedom, bound for that promised land we call Victoria. Now, as he hid away on that ship, the waves gently rocking him, he had to be thinking, I'm gonna be free. I'm gonna be free. What's the first thing I'm gonna do when I get free? I don't know, but I'm gonna be smiling when I do it. He had to be thinking something like that. I know I would be. Well, that smile didn't last long. Somewhere between Olympia and Seattle, he was discovered. And his hopes, well, at that moment, I wondered if he thought about our ancestors who were forced on ships, those who jumped in the oceans to their deaths to avoid slavery. Would he have to do that? And as a storyteller of folk tales, I thought about the stories of slaves flying away to freedom. I wondered if Charles has heard those stories, and I wondered if he were wishing for the wings now. Well, he was discovered. The captain grabbed him, said, "You're going back. I wish I could take you back right now, but I can't. So he locked Charlie up. And then he said, no, you're going to work for your passage. But before they docked in Victoria, the captain made sure that Charles was locked up. Now, when they docked in Victoria, the captain saw something he was not expecting. The dock was full of Negroes and their Victorian supporters waiting for Charlie to walk right into freedom. But word got around in the crowd, he's locked up. They won't let him out. And when they found that out, they were angry. They were up in arms. They started to yell at the crew, we will come on that ship and break him out. And the crew said, yeah, you come on this ship and we're going to break some heads. Free blood was about to be spilled for Charlie's freedom. Now, in the meantime, the ship's Negro cook and 2 other men, they decided to take the legal route. They went to an attorney, filled out affidavits about Charlie's condition. And then they went to a judge and got a writ of habeas corpus, a legal document saying, you have the body, you must release it. Now, a writ of habeas corpus had been tried before to free a slave. 85 years earlier in London, James Somerset had been brought from Virginia to London, and he escaped. But he was snatched by slave catchers and put on a ship. Fortunately, a Londoner, Elizabeth Cade, saw that snatching and decided to do something about it. And I know that's what we would all hope for. If we are in trouble, we hope someone sees and does something. She did. She went to court and got a writ of habeas corpus on Somerset's behalf. And with that piece of paper, Somerset was removed from that ship. She saved him from the fate of slavery in Jamaica. Now, he has at least a chance for freedom. A trial will be held to determine whether he will be slave or free. Now, the trial was big news in London. Britain knew all about slavery because they had allowed it before, they had permitted it. But this is 1772, and people in America were not impressed about the folderol happening in London about the freedom of a slave. They said, if you want to free somebody, why don't you free America? Give us our independence. The war for independence would start a few years later. Well, the trial was held for Somerset, and the attorneys argued that if you are in England, you are free. If you're breathing English air, you are free. And they said everyone has the right to be governed by the laws of the land. Well, the London court agreed, and Somerset was freed. That little piece of paper, that writ of habeas corpus, had worked for Somerset. Would it work for Charles Mitchell? Well, Somerset was in England. He was on British soil, literally. So he was freed. But is Charles Mitchell on British soil? This is a key question, and Mitchell's fate depends on the answer. Mitchell is on an American ship, being held by an American captain. Now, they say that possession is 9/10 of the law, and I don't know who they is, but they is usually right. But on the other hand, there's a court order saying Mitchell should be released, and that ship is in a British port. A battle is brewing in British Columbia, a battle between America and Canada. over the freedom of a slave. Now let me ask you this. What should be done with him? Should he be free? Is he on British soil? Where do you stand? Before you answer, try to put yourself back in 1860. Now, some of you have done genealogical work on your relatives, which might give you an idea where they would stand on the issue. So, perhaps that would help you know where you might have stood. Do you stand with America? Are you going to let a foreign government tell America what to do? Are you a patriot? Do you stand on the side of freedom? Where do you stand? Think about it. Now, Sheriff Naylor knows where he stands. Armed with that writ of habeas corpus, he boards the ship and says, "We're here for Mitchell." Well, the captain wasn't on the ship at the time, so he was talking to a shipmate. And that shipmate knew the gravity of the situation. So he said, "Oh, you're going to have to wait for the captain. I cannot answer this." When Captain Fleming returned, Naylor asked for Mitchell's release. He said, "I will break the door down if necessary." Still, Fleming refused. Tempers got hot. I mean, the people on the dock are still shouting for Mitchell's release. The captain isn't budging an inch. And Sheriff Naylor has a duty to do. But he left the ship empty-handed. He decided to give the captain time to think, to give those people on the dock time to cool off, because the tension between the shore and the ship was so tight. Mitchell could have used it as a tightrope to walk to freedom. Now, imagine Charlie in a tight place on that ship. What is he thinking right about now? I'm surely he's been informed by the black crewmen of what's going on. They're telling him, "Look, the people on the dock, they're with you. We even have a court order to get you released." And I imagine Charlie saying, "Yeah? Then why am I still here?" No answer from the crewman. Meanwhile, the captain cooled off. And it just so happened that the acting governor of Washington Territories was on the ship that day. So Fleming asked Governor McGill, "What should I do?" And the governor was angry about the situation. He said, "If we had a naval ship in these waters, we would put him on that ship, and then I'd like to see those Canadians take him off." But there was no American naval vessel nearby. So the captain was advised to release Mitchell into Sheriff Naylor's custody. That little piece of paper, that writ of habeas corpus, had worked for Charles Mitchell. Oh, he had to be thinking, "I'm gonna be free." But not so fast. There was a bad omen in America. You know, sometimes you think you're taking a step forward, and you look down, and you haven't moved at all. That's how it was for Charlie. An unfortunate event called the Dred Scott decision had occurred in America that would affect Mitchell and every other slave. Now, Dred Scott was a slave who had lived for a bit on free soil territory, so in his mind, he should be free. He filed a lawsuit saying as much. Now, when I started this story, I wondered about Charles Mitchell, a boy who had inherited the legacy of slavery. I wondered if he would be able to wrap his head around the idea of freedom and self-reliance. But here, with Dred Scott, we have a man who has been enslaved the entirety of his 62 years, and he's still fighting for freedom. Now, you and I might have given up a long time ago, but not Dred Scott. What audacity, what strength of mind. Well, guess what? The court said, yes, Dred Scott, you should be free. They agreed with him. But then that case was taken all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, no. First of all, a slave is not free by setting foot on free soil territory. Second of all, blacks aren't even citizens, so you have no right to file suit in federal court. And Congress had no authority to ban slavery in the territories. In other words, there's no such thing as free soil. So Charles Mitchell and you other slaves, get back. Get back, get on back. That's kind of how the saying goes. If you're black, get back. Basically, that's what the court said. So America's court has had its say. Now, Mitchell's fate is in the hands of the Victoria Court. And that court must consider America's decision in thoughts of considering international relations. Now, it has been 2 days since Charles Mitchell hid aboard that ship, hoping for freedom. And he's been locked up ever since. Today, it will be over one way or the other. Now, the trial is about to start. It's a typical day in September in the Northwest. And the courtroom begins to fill up with the Negroes and their supporters, and with some white Americans who have come to Victoria to live and who have brought Jim Crow ideas along with them. The air is tense. Mitchell is brought into the courtroom. A hush falls over the room. Mitchell's supporters smile at him and nod in support, but he nods, but he can't smile because the burden is just too heavy. He takes his seat next to his lawyer and bows his head as if in prayer. On the other side sits Captain Fleming. Judge Cameron enters the room and the arguments begin. Now, the attorney for Mitchell argues that if you're on British soil, you're free. He brings up the Somerset case, and he says that this court has authority to make this decision, and they have jurisdiction over that vessel. In other words, they had the right to take him off that vessel. And he says, in conclusion, Charles Mitchell is on British soil and he should be set at liberty. Now it's Captain Fleming's turn. Now he's still angry about them taking Mitchell off the ship in the first place. And he says, in a voice that is accustomed to having his orders followed, this case will be brought to the attention of the United States government. He wanted that in the record, and that sounds like a serious threat to me. The arguments are over. It's decision time. Judge Cameron considers the arguments, and then he speaks. He says, I agree that this court has jurisdiction over this case. And he says the law is clear. British law does not tolerate slavery. Along with just a few other words, he said, I do order that the sheriff discharge Charles Mitchell forthwith, meaning right now. Imagine that you are Charles Mitchell at that moment. You have been restricted for your entire life. And now, a heavy burden has just become a feather and floated away on an exhale. You are free. Thank you.